Biker insults a homeless man, freezes when Michael Jordan steps in. In the heart of downtown Chicago, where the morning sun cast long shadows between towering skyscrapers, Robert Williams began his daily routine. The gentle autumn breeze carried the scent of coffee from nearby cafes as he carefully tidied his small corner of the world, a modest spot beneath the old maple tree on Michigan Avenue. Despite the hardships life had dealt him, Robert maintained his space with dignity, his weathered hands meticulously arranging his few possessions with military precision. At 62 years old, Robert's face told a story of resilience. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and though his clothes were worn, they were clean and well kept. Each morning, he would greet passers-by with a warm smile that reached his kind brown eyes, offering a good morning that often caught people off guard with its genuine cheerfulness. Today was no different as the city awakened around him. Robert pulled out his most prized possession, a small notebook filled with resources and contact information for other homeless individuals in the area. Over the years, he had become an unofficial guardian of the street, helping newcomers find shelters, soup kitchens, and medical care when needed. As the morning crowd began to thicken with commuters rushing to their offices, Robert noticed Lisa, a young woman who had recently found herself on the streets, struggling with her shopping cart full of belongings. Without hesitation, he rose from his spot and made his way over to her. "The back wheel's stuck again, isn't it?" he called out, his voice carrying the warmth of understanding. Lisa's relief was visible as Robert knelt down to help adjust the wheel, sharing his experience about which carts worked best and where to find them. More than just fixing the cart, Robert shared his morning coffee with Lisa, a small luxury donated by Tony, the owner of the corner cafe, who had come to respect Robert over the years. "Here's the thing about being out here," Robert explained to Lisa. "We look out for each other. That's how we survive." He pulled out his notebook and wrote down the address of a women's shelter that had recently opened a few blocks away. The morning progressed as Robert continued his routine of helping others. He directed Pete, another regular in the area, to a nearby church, giving out warm clothes for the approaching winter. He shared information about a free medical clinic with an elderly man who had developed a persistent cough. Each interaction was marked by Robert's unwavering dignity and compassion. What many passers-by didn't realize was that Robert had once lived a very different life. The small American flag pin on his jacket wasn't just for show. It was a reminder of his service in the Marine Corps, where he had served with distinction. His current circumstances weren't the result of poor choices or lack of effort, but rather a series of unfortunate events that could befall anyone. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Robert took a moment to straighten his small area once again. His possessions were few but organized: a weatherproof sleeping bag, a backpack containing changes of clothes, and his precious notebook. Unlike many others forced to live on the streets, Robert had created a space that reflected his inner dignity, proving that circumstances don't define character. Regular commuters had grown accustomed to Robert's presence. Some would nod in acknowledgement, while others would stop for brief conversations. Susan, a teacher at the nearby elementary school, often brought him yesterday's newspapers. Charlie, a young businessman, occasionally shared his morning bagel. These small gestures of kindness reminded Robert that humanity still existed in the concrete jungle of the city. The morning was peaceful until Robert noticed a group of new homeless individuals looking lost and desperate a few blocks down. Without hesitation, he gathered some of his spare resources: granola bars saved from yesterday's church donation and information about the local shelters. As he approached them, his warm smile and confident demeanor immediately put them at ease. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, pulling out his notebook. "Let me show you where you can get a hot meal and a safe place to rest." This was Robert's way, treating everyone with the respect and dignity he believed all humans deserved, regardless of their circumstances. His corner of Michigan Avenue had become more than just a spot to exist. It had become a beacon of hope for those who had lost their way. As the morning drew on, Robert continued his silent work of making the world a little better, one small act of kindness at a time. Little did Robert know that this ordinary morning would soon take an extraordinary turn, as fate was about to bring an unexpected encounter that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed what was about to unfold. The peaceful scene he had cultivated was about to be disturbed by the roar of an approaching motorcycle, carrying with it a storm that would test Robert's dignity and resilience in ways he never expected. The peaceful morning atmosphere shattered as the thunderous roar of a custom Harley-Davidson echoed through the urban canyon of Michigan Avenue. The rider, Alexander "Alex" Thompson, guided his $50,000 motorcycle through traffic with an air of entitlement, his leather jacket bearing the logos of exclusive motorcycle clubs and designer brands. The chrome of his bike gleamed in the morning sun, a testament to wealth that he wore like armor. Alex had recently purchased one of the luxury condos in the newly renovated building across the street. At 35, he'd made his fortune in tech startups, and now he viewed the world through the lens of success and status. The sight of homeless people in his neighborhood had been a source of growing irritation since he moved in, and Robert's spot, directly visible from his floor-to-ceiling windows, particularly irked him. Deliberately revving his engine, Alex pulled his motorcycle into a spot near Robert's corner, the thunderous noise causing nearby pigeons to scatter and pedestrians to jump. He removed his expensive helmet, revealing a perfectly maintained beard and designer sunglasses. His boots, which cost more than what most people made in a week, crunched on the pavement as he dismounted. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been more stark. While Robert's clothing showed signs of careful maintenance despite their wear, Alex's outfit screamed of excess and showmanship. His leather jacket alone could have funded several months at a homeless shelter, and the watch on his wrist could have provided meals for hundreds. As Alex approached, his face twisted into a grimace of disgust. He made a show of checking his bike's position, unnecessarily adjusting its placement several times, each movement bringing him closer to Robert's spot. The homeless man continued his morning routine, maintaining his dignity despite the obvious provocation. Several regular passers-by slowed their pace, sensing the building tension. "You know," Alex called out loudly, ensuring others could hear, "this used to be a nice neighborhood." He pulled out his phone, making a dramatic show of dialing a number. "Yeah, security? There's a situation here that needs handling." There was no one on the other end of the line, but the performance served its purpose of drawing attention. Robert remained composed, carefully folding his morning newspaper and placing it in his organized stack of belongings. His movements were deliberate and peaceful, a stark contrast to Alex's aggressive posturing. This seemed to irritate Alex even more, who had expected, perhaps even hoped for, a confrontation. "I paid $2 million for my condo," Alex announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying the sharp edge of privilege. "And this is what I have to look at every morning?" He gestured toward Robert's spot, his expensive rings catching the sunlight. A small crowd of onlookers had begun to gather, some filming discreetly with their phones, others watching with uncomfortable expressions. Tony, the cafe owner, stepped outside his shop, concerned about the brewing situation. He'd seen entitled newcomers to the neighborhood before, but something about Alex's demeanor suggested this confrontation would be different. The businessman who usually shared his morning bagel with Robert stood frozen at the corner, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Alex paced back and forth, each pass bringing him closer to Robert's carefully maintained space. His expensive boots kicked up dust that settled on Robert's clean belongings, a subtle act of disrespect that didn't go unnoticed by the gathering crowd. The tension in the air was palpable, like the heaviness before a storm. "People like you," Alex continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're bringing down property values. You're bad for business, bad for the neighborhood." He pulled out his phone again, this time making a real call. "Yeah, Brad? You know that development deal we were discussing? Well, I'm looking at a real problem right outside my building." The morning sun continued to climb higher, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the division between the two men. Robert's corner, usually a place of peace and quiet dignity, had become the stage for a display of the worst kind of privilege. The homeless man's composure remained unbroken, but the subtle tightening of his jaw suggested he was steeling himself for what was to come. Little did Alex know that among the growing crowd of onlookers, a familiar figure had paused his morning walk to observe the unfolding scene. Michael Jordan, dressed casually in a way that somehow both concealed and amplified his legendary presence, stood quietly in the shadow of a nearby building. his eyes narrowing as he watched the situation develop. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of Alex's carefully constructed world and remind everyone watching that true character isn't measured by the price of one's possessions, but by the content of one's heart. The morning air grew thick with anticipation as Alex prepared to escalate his provocations, unaware that his actions were about to lead to a moment that would change his life forever. The tension that had been building reached a breaking point as Alex stepped deliberately into Robert's space, his expensive boots inches from the veteran's carefully arranged belongings. "You know what really gets me?" he sneered, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "You people always act like you deserve to be here, like this is your private property or something." Robert remained seated, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap, but his military bearing became more pronounced. The American flag pin on his jacket caught the morning light, a silent testament to his service that Alex either didn't notice or chose to ignore. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, their morning commutes forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. "I served this country for 22 years, Robert finally spoke, his voice steady and dignified. "Marine Corps. Did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan." He didn't raise his voice or stand up, letting his words carry their own weight. "This spot here? It's public property. I keep it clean, help others when I can, and don't bother anyone." Alex's face reddened at Robert's composed response. "Oh, playing the veteran card, are we?" He pulled out his phone again, making a show of recording. "You know how many fake veterans I've seen begging on these streets? Everyone's got a sob story." His voice dripped with sarcasm as he paced in front of Robert. Several members of the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a business suit took a half step forward before stopping herself, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. Tony, the cafe owner, had moved closer to his door, his hand on his phone, ready to call for help if needed. "After my last tour," Robert continued calmly, "I came home to find my wife had passed from cancer. Medical bills had eaten through our savings. The PTSD made it hard to hold down work. But I'm not asking for your pity, son. Just your respect as a fellow human being." Alex's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Respect? You want respect?" He gestured broadly at Robert's few possessions. "Look at yourself. You're literally living on the street. You know what that makes you? A nuisance. An eyesore. Something that needs to be cleaned up." The crowd had grown larger still, with some people filming discreetly on their phones. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scene, highlighting the stark contrast between Alex's expensive attire and Robert's worn but dignified appearance. In the background, Michael Jordan continued to observe, his presence still unnoticed, his expression growing increasingly stern. "Young man," Robert said, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience, "I've seen real combat. I've lost friends. I've held dying men in my arms. Your words can't hurt me, but they do reveal a lot about you." This seemed to enrage Alex further. He stepped even closer, his shadow falling across Robert's face. "Oh, I reveal a lot about myself. Let me tell you what you reveal. Failure. Pure and simple failure. If you really were a veteran, you'd have figured out how to make it work. Real veterans don't end up on the streets." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the crowd. A young veteran in the audience, identifiable by his military backpack, clenched his fists but held his position, respecting Robert's handling of the situation. "You ever serve?" Robert asked quietly, looking directly into Alex's eyes for the first time. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. "I don't need to serve to know a deadbeat when I see one," Alex spat back, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps shame, behind his aggressive stance. "I built myself up from nothing, made my own success. That's my service to society." Robert nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. "There's something you should know about me, son. Every morning, I help others find shelter, food, and medical care. I keep this corner clean and safe. I've helped dozens of veterans navigate the VA system. What have you done for others lately?" Alex's face contorted with rage. "Done for others? I pay my taxes. I create jobs. I don't owe anyone anything else." He took another step forward, his body language becoming more threatening. and I certainly don't owe you an explanation about my life choices. The morning traffic continued to flow behind them, but the immediate area had grown eerily quiet. Everyone could sense that the confrontation was building towards something explosive. Robert remained seated, his posture straight, his eyes forward, drawing on years of military discipline to maintain his composure. "Sometimes," Robert said softly, almost to himself, "the hardest battles we fight are with our own prejudices." The words seemed to float in the air, carrying a weight that even Alex couldn't immediately dismiss. The scene was set for what would happen next, a moment that would transform not just the lives of these two men, but the perspectives of everyone watching. Michael Jordan shifted his weight, preparing to step forward, knowing that the time for silent observation was coming to an end. Michael Jordan stood in the shadow of a nearby building, his athletic frame still imposing, even in casual clothes. His eyes, known for their intensity during championship games, now focused on the scene unfolding before him. Having witnessed discrimination in various forms throughout his career, the basketball legend felt a familiar tension in his jaw as he watched Alex's treatment of Robert. The morning sun cast long shadows across Michigan Avenue as Jordan observed the growing crowd. He'd stopped during his morning walk, initially drawn by the commotion, but now found himself emotionally invested in the situation. The presence of phone cameras hadn't escaped his notice. He knew that once he stepped in, this would become more than just a local incident. Jordan's mind drifted to his own early days in North Carolina, remembering times when people had judged him based on appearances before his name became synonymous with greatness. He'd experienced the sting of prejudice, the weight of assumptions, and the burden of proving himself repeatedly. These memories stirred something deep within him as he watched Robert maintain his dignity in the face of such blatant disrespect. From his vantage point, Jordan could see every detail of the confrontation. He noticed how Robert's hands, though weathered, moved with the deliberate precision of military training. He observed the American flag pin on Robert's jacket catching the sunlight, a small but significant symbol of service that Alex seemed determined to dismiss. Each detail added to the growing knot of tension in Jordan's chest. The basketball icon had always believed in the power of actions over words. Throughout his career, he'd let his performance on the court speak for itself. Now, watching Robert handle Alex's provocations with quiet strength, Jordan recognized a similar philosophy, a dignity that transcended circumstances. It reminded him of his father, who had taught him that true character reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in times of adversity. As the confrontation continued to escalate, Jordan found himself analyzing it like he once did with opposing teams. He noted the positioning of the growing crowd, the subtle shifts in body language, the rising tension in voices. His instincts, honed through years of reading situations on the court, told him this was building toward a critical moment that would require intervention. The legendary athlete had never been one to seek out public confrontations off the court. His competitive fire had always been channeled through basketball. But standing there, watching injustice unfold, he felt the same surge of determination that had driven him during crucial game moments. This wasn't about scoring points or winning championships. It was about standing up for fundamental human dignity. Veterans' neatly organized notebook, the precious collection of resources that had helped countless homeless individuals. In that crucial moment, a commanding voice cut through the morning air like a thunderclap. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The words, delivered with the same authority that had led countless teams to victory, stopped Alex's foot mid-swing. Michael Jordan stepped out of the shadows, his presence immediately electrifying the crowd. The basketball legend's 6'6" frame cast a long shadow as he moved forward with the same purposeful stride that had carried him across countless basketball courts. His expression was stern, reminiscent of the intense focus he'd shown in championship games. The crowd fell into a stunned silence, phones raised to capture this unexpected development. "When I was growing up," Jordan began, his voice carrying easily across the now silent street, "my father taught me that you can tell a lot about a man by how he treats those who can't do anything for him." He moved closer, each step deliberate, his eyes fixed on Alex. "Right now, you're telling everyone here exactly who you are." Alex's foot slowly lowered, his face cycling through a series of emotions, confusion, recognition, and then something approaching fear. The arrogant swagger that had dominated his posture moments ago melted away under Jordan's steady gaze. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Jordan positioned himself between Alex and Robert, his presence both a shield and a statement. Though he wore casual clothes, his bearing carried the weight of his legendary status. "That notebook you were about to kick," Jordan continued, gesturing to Robert's belongings. "It's filled with information to help people survive. While you've been looking down on him, this man has been lifting others up." The crowd had grown larger still, with people abandoning their morning commutes to witness this extraordinary scene. The contrast between the three men told its own story. Alex in his expensive biker gear, Robert with his dignified composure despite his circumstances, and Jordan, whose presence commanded attention without any need for external trappings. "I've won championships," Jordan said, his voice carrying the wisdom of his experiences. "I've made game-winning shots. But you know what really matters? How we treat each other. Every person has dignity, regardless of their circumstances." His words seemed to resonate through the street, carrying the weight of truth that transcended his athletic achievements. Alex's face had lost its color, his previous bravado replaced by the dawning realization of his actions. The phone he had been using to record his harassment hung limply at his side. The expensive motorcycle that had seemed like such a powerful statement of his status now looked oddly insignificant in the shadow of Jordan's moral authority. Robert remained seated, his military bearing unchanged, but a slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The American flag pin on his jacket seemed to shine brighter in the morning sun, its significance now impossible to ignore. The veteran's dignity in the face of adversity had drawn the attention and respect of one of sport's greatest icons. "Your motorcycle," Jordan observed, glancing at the gleaming Harley. "It's impressive, but what's more impressive is what this man does every day, serving others, maintaining his dignity, showing respect even when he receives none." His words carried no anger, just a powerful conviction that seemed to touch everyone present. The gathering crowd had formed a loose circle around the scene, their phones capturing every word, every gesture. The morning traffic continued to flow behind them, creating a strange juxtaposition between the extraordinary moment unfolding on the sidewalk and the ordinary rhythm of city life. Jordan took another step forward, his presence becoming even more commanding. "I could tell you about the millions I've made, the records I've broken, the games I've won. But right now, I'm just a man who can't stand by and watch someone abuse another human being." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Alex's transformation was visible. The arrogant biker who had arrived intent on intimidation now stood deflated, his expensive gear and aggressive posture no longer projecting power, but revealing insecurity. The crowd watched as Jordan's words stripped away the facades, leaving only the raw truth of the moment. The morning sun had risen higher, casting shorter shadows now, as if nature itself was illuminating the scene for all to witness. The tension that had been building reached its peak and began to transform into something else, a moment of profound realization that would change not just Alex's life, but touch everyone who witnessed or would later watch this encounter. The transformation in Alex's demeanor was instantaneous as full recognition dawned. You're Michael Jordan," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The arrogant facade crumbled completely as he stood face to face with his childhood hero. The man whose poster had once adorned his bedroom wall was now looking at him with profound disappointment. "Yeah, I am," Jordan replied, his voice carrying the weight of years of earned respect. "But right now, that's not what matters. What matters is how you've been treating this man." He gestured toward Robert, who maintained his dignified posture. "I've been watching for a while, trying to understand what could make someone act with such disrespect toward another human being." The crowd had grown larger, with people stepping out of nearby buildings and cars slowing down to witness the scene. Phones recorded from every angle as Jordan continued, "You know what I see when I look at Robert? I see strength. I see dignity. I see someone who serves others despite his circumstances. But when I look at you," he paused, letting the silence speak volumes. I see someone who needs to learn what real strength looks like." Alex's expensive boots scuffed against the pavement as he shifted uncomfortably. The leather jacket that had seemed so impressive earlier now felt like a costume, a facade of toughness that had been stripped away by Jordan's words. His eyes darted between Jordan, Robert, and the crowd, seeing his own actions reflected in their expressions. I didn't," Alex began, but Jordan cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't tell me what you didn't mean to do," Jordan said firmly. "I watched you make choice after choice. Each time you could have chosen respect, you chose contempt. Each time you could have shown humanity, you chose cruelty." His words carried the same intensity that had once dominated basketball courts across the nation. The morning sun cast Jordan's shadow long across the sidewalk, stretching toward Alex like an accusation. Robert remained seated, his presence a silent testament to the dignity Jordan spoke of. The American flag pin on his jacket caught the light, a small but powerful reminder of his service. "That motorcycle," Jordan continued, nodding toward the gleaming Harley, "tells me you've done well for yourself. But success isn't just about what you own. It's about how you carry yourself, how you treat others." He glanced at the crowd, acknowledging their presence. "Everyone here has seen what kind of person you chose to be today." Alex's face reddened with shame as he recognized faces in the crowd. Neighbors from his luxury condo, regular commuters, even the barista from his favorite coffee shop. The carefully constructed image he'd built for himself had been shattered in a matter of minutes by his own actions and Jordan's intervention. "I remember when I was starting out," Jordan shared, his voice taking on a reflective tone. "People looked at me and made assumptions. They thought they knew who I was, what I was capable of. But you know what I learned? Prejudice says more about the person judging than the person being judged." Tony, the cafe owner, had emerged from his shop carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Robert and offered the other to Jordan, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about respect and dignity. The contrast between this act of kindness and Alex's behavior hung in the air like a heavy cloud. "Man, I had your jersey," Alex admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "Number 23, watched every game I could, tried to be like you on the court." The admission seemed to cost him something, stripping away another layer of his facade. "Then you should know," Jordan responded, "that every victory I ever had came from respect. Respect for the game, respect for my opponents, respect for every person who stepped on that court. That's what made me who I am, not the championships or the money." The crowd had fallen completely silent, absorbing every word. Even the usual morning traffic seemed muted, as if the city itself was paying attention to this moment of reckoning. Robert's quiet dignity throughout the confrontation stood as a powerful counterpoint to Alex's earlier behavior. "So here's what's going to happen," Jordan said, his voice taking on the tone of a coach delivering a crucial play. "You're going to take a good, hard look at yourself and the choices you made today, and then you're going to have a chance to show everyone here what kind of person you really want to be." The morning sun had risen higher now, eliminating the last shadows from the scene, as if nature itself was ensuring that nothing could hide in this moment of truth. Alex stood at a crossroads, his childhood hero on one side, his own actions on the other, and a crowd of witnesses waiting to see which path he would choose. Jordan turned to Robert, his expression softening. "Sir, would you mind sharing your story? Sometimes people need to understand that every life has a path that led to where it is now." The respect in Jordan's voice was evident, treating Robert not as a homeless man, but as a fellow human being worthy of dignity. Robert straightened his already impeccable posture, the military bearing ingrained through years of service becoming even more apparent. "Before I found myself here," he began, his voice clear and steady, "I was a basketball coach at Lincoln High School, 20 years building a program, teaching young men not just about basketball, but about life." Alex's expression shifted from shame to surprise as Robert continued. "We won state championships in 2008 and 2009, had players go on to Division I schools. Some of them still write to me, send me updates about their lives." A hint of pride crept into his voice, not for himself, but for his former students. Jordan nodded encouragingly. Leadership doesn't stop being leadership just because circumstances change, he observed, drawing on his own experiences as both player and owner. The crowd listened intently, phones still recording as Robert's story unfolded. My wife Sarah got sick in 2015, Robert continued, his voice softening slightly. Cancer, the insurance covered some of it, but the experimental treatments... He paused, collecting himself. We spent everything we had, sold the house, my car, cashed in the retirement fund. She fought hard for 3 years. Alex had unconsciously taken a step closer, his earlier aggression replaced by rapt attention. The expensive motorcycle behind him seemed to fade into insignificance as Robert's story continued. After she passed, the PTSD from my tours started hitting harder. The nightmares came back, couldn't focus on coaching anymore, had to step down. Robert's hands, folded in his lap, remained steady. The medical bills kept coming, then the economy took a hit, and the pension fund I'd been counting on collapsed. One thing led to another and, well, he gestured to his current situation. Jordan's presence seemed to grow even more commanding as he addressed the crowd. You hear that? A man who served his country, shaped young lives, faced personal tragedy, and still maintains his dignity. Still helps others. That's real strength. Robert pulled out his notebook, the one Alex had nearly kicked earlier. Started keeping track of resources, shelters, food banks, medical clinics. Figured if I was going to be out here, I could at least help others navigate the system, make it a little easier for them than it was for me. Alex moved closer still, his eyes fixed on the notebook. Those names you were writing earlier, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Veterans, Robert confirmed. 3 of them, fresh on the streets. I was planning to help them connect with the VA today and show them where to get their paperwork started. He opened the notebook, revealing pages of meticulous notes and contact information. Jordan turned to Alex. Still think he's just an eyesore? Just something that needs to be cleaned up? The questions hung in the air, challenging not just Alex, but everyone present to examine their own prejudices. I coach some of the kids at the shelter now, Robert added, a small smile crossing his face. They might not have proper courts or equipment, but they've got heart. Sometimes that's all you need. He looked at Jordan. Been using some of your old training techniques, actually. They still work. The crowd had grown silent again, absorbing the layers of Robert's story. The morning sun illuminated his face, highlighting both the wear of his struggles and the dignity that remained undiminished. His American flag pin seemed to shine brighter now, its significance deeper than ever. Alex stood transfixed, his own life choices laid bare in stark contrast to Robert's resilience. The expensive gear he wore, which had seemed so important earlier, now felt like a hollow costume. Here was a man who had lost everything except his integrity, still finding ways to serve others. Take a good look, Jordan addressed both Alex and the crowd. This is what courage looks like. Not a fancy bike or expensive clothes. It's about getting up every day, maintaining your dignity, and helping others, even when you're struggling yourself. Robert's story hung in the air, a powerful testament to the unexpected turns life can take and the strength it takes to maintain one's humanity in the face of adversity. The morning traffic continued to flow behind them, but the spot on Michigan Avenue had been transformed into a space of profound revelation. Michael Jordan surveyed the scene before him, years of leadership experience evident in his calculated pause before speaking. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting a different light on the gathered crowd, on Robert's dignified posture, and on Alex's transformed demeanor. It was time to turn this moment into something more than just a confrontation. Here's what we're going to do, Jordan announced, his voice carrying the same authority that had once commanded basketball courts worldwide. Alex, you're going to spend 1 day, just 1 day, volunteering at the shelter where Robert coaches, and for every hour you put in, I'll personally match it with a $1,000 donation to the shelter. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Alex's eyes widened at the proposition. Jordan continued, not just serving meals or cleaning up. I want you to sit with people, learn their stories, coach alongside Robert, see the humanity you were so quick to dismiss. And before you answer, Jordan added, holding up a hand as Alex opened his mouth to speak, know that everyone here is witness to this moment. Your choice right now will show who you really are, not who you pretend to be with that expensive bike and those designer clothes. Robert sat quietly, watching the scene unfold with the patience of a man who had seen both the best and worst of humanity. His notebook lay open on his lap, its pages containing countless stories, similar to the ones Jordan was challenging Alex to learn. For every person you meet at the shelter, Jordan continued, his voice growing more intense, I want you to remember how you acted today. Remember what you said about cleaning up the neighborhood. Remember how it felt to stand here and judge a man whose story you didn't even know. The crowd had grown completely still, phones still recording, as Jordan laid out his challenge. Even the usual morning traffic seemed muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Tony, the cafe owner, had stepped closer, coffee pot forgotten in his hand as he watched the scene unfold. Mr. Jordan? Robert spoke up, his voice steady. The shelter could use those donations. We've got kids there who've never had proper basketball shoes, veterans who need help with medical supplies. He paused, looking directly at Alex, and we could always use more coaches. Jordan nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. Then it settled. One day of your time, Alex. One day to step out of your comfortable world and into Robert's. One day to learn what real strength looks like. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling the shelter right now. When do you want to do this? Alex stood frozen, the weight of the moment visible in his stance. The arrogant biker who had arrived intent on intimidation was gone, replaced by someone facing a crucial choice about who they wanted to be. His expensive boots scuffed against the pavement as he shifted his weight. I can do it today, Alex finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then stronger. I can do it today. Right now, if that's possible. The words seemed to surprise even him as they came out. Jordan's smile widened slightly. Today it is. He turned to the crowd. You all heard that, right? Today. And I expect some of you to show up too. Let's turn this moment into real change. His eyes swept across the gathered faces, challenging them to be part of something bigger. The morning session starts at 10, Robert offered, checking his watch. That gives you about an hour to change into something more appropriate than that leather jacket. There was no mockery in his voice, just practical advice from a man who had learned what really mattered in life. Jordan pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. My office will be in touch with the shelter about the donations. For every hour you put in today, Alex, $1,000. Make it count. He handed the card to Robert. And you, sir, call this number if he doesn't show up, though something tells me he will. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting no shadows, as if ensuring that nothing could hide in this moment of truth. Alex looked at his motorcycle, then at his expensive clothes, then finally at Robert and Jordan. I'll be there, he said, and for the first time that morning, his voice carried no pretense. Jordan extended his hand to Robert, who stood to shake it with military precision. Thank you for your service, Jordan said, both in uniform and here on these streets. Then he turned to Alex. 10 o'clock. Don't be late. And remember, everyone here is watching to see what kind of man you really are. The challenge had been issued, the stakes set. What had begun as a confrontation was transforming into an opportunity for redemption, not just for Alex, but for everyone who witnessed it. The morning air seemed charged with possibility as Jordan's challenge hung in the air, waiting to see what would happen next. The morning sun reached its peak as Alex stood rooted to the spot, his entire worldview shifting under the weight of the last hour. His eyes moved from his expensive motorcycle to Robert's meticulous corner, then to Jordan's commanding presence as the reality of his decision settled in. The crowd remained silent, waiting to see what would happen next. I need to change, Alex said finally, his voice carrying none of its earlier arrogance. He looked down at his expensive leather jacket and boots, seeing them through new eyes. They're not appropriate for the shelter. The admission seemed to cost him something, but also free him in a way. Robert nodded approvingly and opened his notebook. With practiced efficiency, he wrote down the shelter's address and basic instructions. Wear something comfortable, he advised, tearing out the page. We'll be doing a lot of moving around with the kids during basketball practice. Jordan watched the exchange with the calculating eye of someone who had spent years reading people both on and off the court. I'll make some calls, he said, pulling out his phone. Make sure the shelter knows about the donation arrangement. And Alex, he fixed the biker with his legendary stare. Don't just show up ready to learn. Alex took the paper from Robert with unexpected reverence, as if the simple notebook page represented something far more significant than mere directions. I have some old gym clothes, he said, almost to himself. Haven't used them in a while, but... It's not about the clothes, Jordan interjected. It's about what you bring inside them, the attitude you walk in with, the respect you show. He glanced at his watch. You've got 53 minutes to figure out who you want to be when you walk through those shelter doors. The crowd had started to thin slightly, but many remained, invested in the unfolding story. Some had already pulled up the shelter's information on their phones, making their own plans to visit. Tony from the cafe stepped forward with a fresh cup of coffee for Robert and an unexpected offer. I can provide lunch, he said, looking between Robert and Jordan. For the shelter today. It's not much, but... Jordan nodded appreciatively, recognizing another small act of community building in the wake of conflict. Alex straddled his motorcycle, but the movement lacked his earlier showmanship. I'll be there, he said, looking directly at Robert. And I'm sorry for everything I said, everything I did. The words came out awkwardly, but their sincerity was unmistakable. Apologies are good, Robert replied, years of coaching experience evident in his tone. Actions are better. Show me at the shelter. He turned to Jordan. We've got about 15 kids in the basketball program right now. Most of them have never had proper coaching. Jordan's expression softened slightly. 15 kids who need guidance, need someone to believe in them. He looked pointedly at Alex. Think about that on your ride home. Think about how many lives you could impact in just one day. Alex started his motorcycle, but the engine's roar seemed different now, less a statement of aggression and more a countdown to redemption. Before pulling away, he turned back one last time. What if I want to do more than one day? The question hung in the air, causing Jordan to smile slightly. Then I'll match every hour you put in, for as long as you're serious about making a difference. He pulled out another business card and handed it to Tony. Keep track of his hours. My office will be in touch about the donations. Robert had already begun gathering his few possessions, preparing for his regular walk to the shelter. His movements were practiced, efficient, every item finding its proper place. The notebook, which had nearly been kicked across the sidewalk earlier, was carefully stored in his weatherproof bag. Coach, Alex said suddenly, the word surprising everyone, including himself. Would it be okay if I walked with you to the shelter? After I change, I mean. I could park my bike at home and meet you back here. Robert paused in his packing, considering the request. 20 minutes, he said finally. I'll wait 20 minutes. After that, you'll need to find your own way. The offer was both a challenge and an opportunity, a chance to prove the sincerity of Alex's transformation. Jordan watched this exchange with approval. The day's already changing, he observed, and it's not even 10 o'clock. He turned to address the remaining crowd. Remember what you saw here today. Remember how quickly judgment can turn to understanding when we take the time to learn each other's stories. As the scene began to disperse, with Alex riding off to change and the crowd slowly returning to their morning routines, Jordan helped Robert finish packing his corner. The simple act, performed by a sports legend without hesitation, served as a final lesson to those still watching. The morning's confrontation was ending, but something new was beginning. In less than an hour, a story of conflict had transformed into one of possibility. The corner of Michigan Avenue, which had witnessed the worst and best of human nature, now stood ready for the next chapter to unfold. The shelter's gymnasium buzzed with unexpected energy as Alex walked through the doors, wearing simple gym clothes that contrasted sharply with his earlier biker attire. Robert was already there, organizing a group of teenagers who watched the newcomer with curious eyes. The scuffed basketball court, marked with faded lines and worn backboards, told its own story of countless hours of practice and play. Right on time, Robert acknowledged, checking his watch. The military precision that had been evident in his street corner organization was now directed toward running the basketball program. 15 kids, ranging from 12 to 17, stood in a loose circle, their worn sneakers and mixed-matched clothing speaking to their circumstances. Alex stood awkwardly at first, his confidence from the morning stripped away in this new environment. Jordan's words echoed in his mind as he watched Robert move among the kids with natural ease, each interaction marked by genuine respect and attention. This was a different world from his luxury condo just blocks away. "Coach, who's the new guy?" asked one of the teenagers, a tall boy with worn sneakers held together by duct tape. The question carried no judgment, just genuine curiosity. Robert glanced at Alex, giving him space to introduce himself. "I'm Alex," he said, his voice softer than it had been that morning. "I'm here to learn and help." The simplicity of the statement surprised him. Gone was the need to prove his worth through expensive possessions or aggressive behavior. Robert divided the kids into groups, assigning Alex to work with 4 of them on basic dribbling drills. As he demonstrated the proper technique, memories of his own childhood basketball dreams surfaced, dreams that had somehow gotten buried under layers of material success and arrogance. The morning's first breakthrough came when Marcus, the boy with the duct-taped sneakers, finally mastered a crossover dribble Alex had been teaching him. The joy on the teenager's face was genuine, and Alex felt something shift inside himself as he celebrated the small victory with his student. "Good work, Marcus," Robert called from across the court. "Alex, show him how to incorporate that into a drive to the basket." The trust in Robert's voice, so shortly after their confrontation, struck Alex deeply. As the morning session progressed, Alex found himself fully immersed in the work. He forgot about his expensive motorcycle parked outside, forgot about his image, forgot about everything, except the immediate task of helping these kids improve their game. The transformation wasn't just in his actions, it was happening deep within. During a water break, one of the younger kids approached Alex. "My brother said he saw you this morning," the boy said quietly. "Said you were being mean to Coach Robert." The simple observation carried no accusation, just a child's direct honesty. Alex knelt down to the boy's level. "I was," he admitted, the truth feeling like both a burden and a relief. "I was wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make big mistakes, and then we have to work hard to make things right." Robert, overhearing the exchange, nodded approvingly. The morning's confrontation had planted a seed, and now they were watching it grow. The shelter's worn gymnasium had become a space of transformation, not just for the kids learning basketball, but for a man learning humanity. As noon approached, Tony from the cafe arrived with lunch for everyone. The simple act of sharing a meal with the kids, hearing their stories, and watching how Robert knew each of their situations and struggles continued to chip away at Alex's previously held prejudices. "Coach," Alex said during the lunch break, "I noticed Marcus's shoes." He paused, thinking of Jordan's $1,000 per hour pledge. "How many kids here need proper basketball shoes?" Robert looked around the room thoughtfully. "Most of them," he replied, "but it's not just about the shoes. They need stability, guidance, someone to believe in them." The veteran coach's words carried the weight of years of experience. The afternoon session began with Alex teaching defensive stances to a new group of kids. His patient explanations and encouraging words showed no trace of the man who had arrived on Michigan Avenue that morning, intent on confrontation. As he worked with the kids, Alex caught glimpses of Robert watching him. The morning's antagonist had been replaced by someone else, someone who was beginning to understand that true worth wasn't measured by the price of a motorcycle or the exclusivity of an address. The transformation continued through each drill, each interaction, each moment of connection with kids who had every reason to be cynical, but instead showed up every day ready to learn and grow. Alex found himself checking the time, not because he wanted to leave, but because he wanted to make sure each hour counted toward Jordan's pledge. The worn gymnasium, with its scuffed floors and bare walls, had become more than just a basketball court. It had become a space of redemption, where the morning's conflict was being transformed into something meaningful and lasting. 1 month had passed since that transformative morning on Michigan Avenue. The shelter's gymnasium, once foreign territory to Alex, had become as familiar as his own living room. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, catching dust motes in its beams, as Alex helped Marcus perfect his jump shot technique. The teenager's feet now sported proper basketball shoes, part of the equipment donated through Jordan's Matched Hours program. Robert stood at half court, clipboard in hand, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. The past month had seen Alex show up every day, far exceeding the initial one-day challenge. Each hour he spent coaching had been matched by Jordan's $1,000 pledge, transforming not just Alex's life, but the entire shelter's basketball program. "Looking good, Marcus," Alex called out as the ball swished through the net. The pride in his voice was genuine, a far cry from the artificial superiority he'd displayed that fateful morning. The expensive motorcycle that had once been his statement piece now regularly carried donations of equipment and supplies to the shelter. The gym's door opened, and Michael Jordan himself walked in, dressed casually, but carrying the same commanding presence as always. He'd made a habit of stopping by occasionally, watching the program's progress, and seeing firsthand how his challenge had sparked real change. "How's the team looking, Coach?" Jordan asked Robert, though his eyes were on Alex working with the kids. The transformation he'd hoped to inspire had exceeded even his expectations. "We've got our first game next week," Robert replied, his military precision now focused on developing plays and strategies. "Alex has been here every morning, working with them on fundamentals. The kids are ready." Jordan moved through the gym, stopping to offer tips and encouragement to various players. He paused near Alex, who was now demonstrating defensive positioning to a group of younger kids. "You've put in a lot of hours," Jordan observed. "My accountants noticed." Alex straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Best investment I've ever made," he replied, watching as his students practiced the moves he'd just shown them. "Though, I have to admit, my motorcycle's getting jealous of all the time I spend here." The joke carried a deeper truth. The man who had once used that motorcycle as a symbol of superiority now saw it as simply a means of transportation, often to and from the shelter. His designer clothes had been replaced by practical coaching gear, his aggressive stance by an educator's patience. Robert joined them, his notebook, the same one Alex had nearly kicked that morning, now filled with practice schedules and game strategies rather than just shelter resources. "The change in the kids is remarkable," he said. "Having consistent coaching, proper equipment, it makes a difference." "The change isn't just in the kids," Jordan replied, his gaze steady on Alex. The former antagonist nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. The past month had stripped away layers of prejudice and pretense, revealing someone even Alex hadn't known existed within himself. The gymnasium had become more than just a basketball court. It was a place of transformation, where the morning's conflict had evolved into a sustained commitment to change. The worn floorboards and basic equipment now represented opportunity rather than poverty, potential rather than limitation. Marcus approached the group, basketball tucked under his arm. "Coach Alex, can you show me that crossover move again?" The request was made with the confidence of someone who knew they would be heard and helped, not dismissed or ignored. "Sure thing," Alex replied, immediately turning his attention to his student. Jordan and Robert watched as the man who had once judged people by their circumstances now worked patiently with a teenager who had become not just a student, but a reminder of the power of second chances. The morning session continued, with Alex moving seamlessly between groups of players, offering guidance, encouragement, and the occasional stern word when needed. His coaching style had developed its own character, firm but supportive, demanding but understanding. Jordan pulled Robert aside as they watched the practice unfold. "You know," he said, "sometimes the best victories aren't won on a professional court. They're won in places like this, one person at a time." Robert nodded, his military bearing softened by satisfaction. "When he first walked in that day, I wasn't sure if he'd last an hour. Now look at him. He's usually here before I am." The transformation was evident in every interaction. The arrogant biker, who had arrived that morning intent on confrontation, had been replaced by someone who understood that true strength lay in lifting others up, not pushing them down. The morning sun had risen higher now, its light filling the gymnasium with a warm glow. The sound of basketballs bouncing, sneakers squeaking on the floor, and young voices calling out plays created a symphony of purpose. Alex moved through it all with the ease of someone who had found their true calling, his previous life of superficial status symbols feeling like a distant memory. The roar of dozens of motorcycles filled Michigan Avenue on a crisp Saturday morning, but this time the sound carried a different meaning. Alex led a long line of riders, each bike loaded with donations for the shelter. His own Harley, once a symbol of status and intimidation, now proudly displayed a banner, "Riding for Hope, Shelter Basketball Program Fundraiser." Robert stood at his familiar corner, but today he wasn't alone. Beside him, Michael Jordan watched the approaching motorcade with approval. The shelter's basketball team, including Marcus in his now well-worn but proper basketball shoes, lined the street, cheering as the bikers approached. "From one rider to an entire community," Jordan observed, watching as Alex brought his bike to a stop in the exact spot where months ago their confrontation had changed everything. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed that morning's events. Alex dismounted, his leather jacket now bearing a patch with the shelter's basketball program logo. Behind him, other riders began parking their bikes. Wealthy executives, working-class mechanics, and everything in between, all united by the cause that had grown from that fateful confrontation. "Coach Robert," Alex called out, the title now spoken with genuine respect. "We've got equipment for 3 more teams, plus enough funding to expand the program to 2 more shelters." His voice carried none of its former arrogance, replaced by the quiet pride of someone who had found a genuine purpose. The kids from the program rushed forward to help unload the bikes, each carrying boxes of new basketballs, shoes, and uniforms. Marcus, now team captain, organized his teammates with the same efficiency he'd learned from months of Alex's coaching. Jordan stepped forward to address the gathered crowd, which had grown to include many familiar faces. Tony from the cafe was there, still providing regular lunches to the program. Local business owners who had witnessed the original confrontation now stood ready to contribute to the cause. "This is what real change looks like," Jordan announced, his voice carrying across the street. "It's not just about one morning, one confrontation, or one challenge. It's about the follow-through, the commitment to keep showing up, keep giving back, keep making a difference." Robert opened his notebook, the same one that had almost been kicked across the sidewalk months ago. Its pages now contained not just shelter resources, but the names of countless volunteers, donors, and supporters who had joined their cause. The simple notebook had become a testament to how one moment of conflict could spark a movement of compassion. "When Alex first walked into the shelter," Robert shared with the crowd, "I wasn't sure if he'd last the day. Now he's not just a coach, he's inspired an entire community to see things differently." The veteran's words carried the weight of someone who had witnessed true transformation. Alex stepped forward, standing in the exact spot where he had once confronted Robert. "6 months ago, I thought success was about what you owned, what you could show off. I couldn't have been more wrong." He gestured to the gathered bikers, the basketball team, and the growing crowd of supporters. "This is success, building something that matters, helping others grow, being part of a community." The morning sun caught the chrome of the assembled motorcycles, creating a dazzling display. But now the bikes represented something different, not status or intimidation, but the power of community coming together for a cause. Jordan moved through the crowd, shaking hands and talking with riders and players alike. His challenge had sparked something that had taken on a life of its own, growing beyond anything he had initially imagined. Marcus stepped up to Alex's bike, running his hand along the new banner. "Remember when you first taught me that crossover?" he asked, grinning. "Now we're teaching it to the new kids at the other shelters." The transformation had come full circle. The corner of Michigan Avenue that had witnessed conflict now stood as a symbol of redemption and community. Alex's journey from antagonist to advocate had inspired others to examine their own prejudices and find ways to give back. As the riders began unloading their donations, Robert and Alex shared a look that spoke volumes. The morning's light caught Robert's American flag pin, still proudly displayed on his jacket, a reminder of service that now carried new meaning for everyone involved. "Ready for another day of coaching?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. Alex smiled, looking at the gathered community, riders, players, and supporters all working together, Always ready, coach, always ready. The story that had begun with a confrontation had evolved into something much bigger, a testament to the power of transformation, the importance of community, and the truth that it's never too late to change your path and make a difference in the lives of others. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Comment below where you're watching from and share a time when someone's kindness changed your perspective. Remember, sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest moments of understanding. See you in the next video. Want to support our channel? Join our growing community of viewers who believe in the power of storytelling to create change. Your support helps us continue sharing these meaningful stories. Until next time, remember that every act of kindness counts. See you in our next story.